This morning I want to talk to you guys about the fountains of youth. And notice that there's an S in the word fountain because I'm going to talk about more than one. But let me start off with a question. So what do muscle loss, bone loss, poor balance, high cholesterol, hypertension, stenosis, and cancer all have in common?
Old age.
That's pretty much it. They're all byproducts of aging. Now, we think of aging, what we think of is what we see on the outside, but biological aging actually occurs at the cellular level. Now, for thousands of years, tales have been told about a fountain that somehow restores a person's youth, whatever that means. And the earliest recording of a fountain of youth was written by Greek historian, maybe someone else can pronounce this who studied Greek, but Herodotus, in 5th century BC. Since then, billions upon billions of dollars have been spent trying to develop products and solutions for the age-old problem of aging. Just think, cosmetics, supplements, creams, masks, dyes, different types of clothing like Spanx, hair plugs, sports cars, all of this in an effort to get back to this idea that we have of youth. All in an effort to make us look and feel young again. Well, by the end of this presentation, I will share with you the 4 fountains of youth that are actually backed by research. And each has the power to slow the aging process and prolong your lifespan. So I'm going to start off with a question, and I want you to think about this for a second and answer it in your minds. Do all living things age? Raise your hand for yes. Raise your hand for no. The answer is no. The hydra, which is a squiggly little relative of the jellyfish, can actually regenerate and does not die of old age. It doesn't mean it doesn't die. You can take it and step on it, it's dead. But it will not die of old age if you just let it live freely. It is essentially immortal. In fact, all early life forms, starting about 3.7 billion years ago, were basically immortal. Since single-celled organisms like algae and bacteria reproduce by splitting themselves into daughter cells, they actually don't really age. Aging and mortality didn't become possible until the advent of sex. So sex started about 1 billion years ago with the birth of fungi in the animal kingdom, and once organisms could actually pass on their genetic material, they essentially became disposable. In short, sex is killing us all. All right, the next question. Do humans have to age? Think about that for a second. Raise your hand for yes. Raise your hand for no. The tricky questions, right? Once you learn about other animals that don't age, you're like, well, wait a minute, why can't we do that? The answer is sort of. So humans can make cells that don't age. The problem is those are called cancer cells. Humans have cells that don't age, specifically stem cells like those producing the ova, which in the man is the sperm and the woman is the egg. And there are 5 cases of human beings that don't really age, at least not in the classic sense. So we're going to take a look at one, and that's Brooke Greenberg. And she actually died in 2013, born in 1993. So she died at age 20, so she didn't live forever. But Brooke was born healthy, but didn't grow or age normally. In fact, this is a picture of Brooke at age 16 years old. And physicians couldn't figure out what she had, so they just called it Syndrome X because they had no better name for it. And the thing was is that different parts of Brooke's body actually aged at different rates. So her blood was her real age. It was actually 16-year-old blood. But her body was that of a toddler. It didn't age like your body and my body does, and she had the brain of an infant. Brooke eventually died of lung failure, but Syndrome X is proof that tissue can slow the aging process. There's actually 5 cases of Syndrome X in the entire world. So what actually does cause aging? It's kind of useful to know that if we're going to try to slow it down. Well, first, unfortunately, our cells are actually programmed to die. Every species is on a preordained biological timetable. Now, normal human cells die after about 50 cellular divisions when they reach what's referred to as the Hayflick limit. Now, Leonard Hayflick discovered in 1961 that each time a cell divides, the DNA end cap, which is referred to as a telomere, gets shorter and shorter and shorter until there's no more telomeres left and the thing can't divide anymore. This is sort of like nibbling off the end of a carrot until you're all the way down to the nub. Now, some species are programmed to die faster than others. The average human lives to about 79, but the oldest known human lived to 115 years old. The average dog lives to age 12. Now, dogs aren't necessarily more prone to disease, more unhealthy or less active than human beings do, and yet they live about 1/10 of our lifespan. They are just programmed to live for about 12 years. The Greenland shark is programmed to live for 400 years, and another animal, that's our kingdom, the sponge, which is that thing that sits in the sea and kind of just goes like this, can live up to 15,000 years. Same kind of cells that we have, living 15,000 years. Just think about that for a second. This programming occurs at the level of the DNA. Just remember Hayflick with the carrot. To better understand the role of genetics, that genetics plays in the fate of living things, let's take a look at plants. Do you guys like plants? I don't know much about plants, so I had to really think to understand this, but we're going to look at perennial versus annual plants. Now, perennials, such as strawberries and potatoes, are programmed to live forever. They produce clones of themselves, which essentially makes the organism immortal. You plant them once, they just keep on going. Annuals, on the other hand, such as wheat and watermelons, die each year. Perennials are programmed to live forever. Annuals are programmed to die. Now you understand, it's not that the strawberry is healthier than the watermelon. That doesn't even make any sense. It's just how evolution worked it out. But in 2008, there was a discovery. And the discovery was if you take an annual plant and you alter 2 little genes in its profile, you can actually turn it into a perennial plant. 2 little genes. Think about that as far as humans in the future. You can actually make the mortal immortal, at least in plants. The second cause of aging occurs as the result of cellular damage. Now, that's damage to the cell's structure. Think about like cartilage wear in an arthritic joint, or damage to the cell's actual DNA. That's like ultraviolet radiation from the sun or chemical exposure, and if that damage occurs at the DNA level, that is one of the primary things that cause oncogenesis, which is the development of cancer cells. This damage can also affect stem cells, which can hinder regeneration. In other words, you don't really heal like you used to as you age because this damage affects the cells that are responsible for regeneration. Therefore, any effort to combat aging should target either the programming at the level of the DNA or the damage. We're really going to talk mostly about number 2 because that's what we can control. So we talked about what causes aging, but let's take a moment to talk about what aging causes. So according to Dillon, a researcher in 2014, aging is among the greatest known risk factors for most human diseases. Now this is the depressing part, but I promise you there's a silver lining at the end. Of the 150,000 people who die each year, between 60 and 90% die from age-related causes. And aging is not just for the old. In fact, by the time you are a teenager, you can no longer hear sounds that you could when you were a toddler. Cognitive decline begins in our mid-20s. I guess that's why when we get out of college, we're dumb. And we start to lose, that's because we start to lose some of the wiring in our brain. The myelinated axons start to die off in about our 20s. Female fertility starts to decline at about age 25. And starting about age 40, you lose about 1 pound of muscle mass per year. That's called sarcopenia. That's, of course, if you don't strength train, that occurs. Women start to lose bone density at about age 35. And within 5 years after menopause, women will lose about 20% of their bone density just due to time. Between age 60 and 64, the incidence of osteoarthritis rises to 53%, and half of adults over 75 have inhibiting hearing loss. By age 80, half of all Americans will have cataracts, and dementia becomes more common with age and rises from 3 to 50% by age 85. Balance declines in about 70% of older adults, and poor balance and low bone density lead to fall-related fractures. According to the National Institute of Health, 1 in 4 individuals who sustain a hip fracture will die within 1 year. If that doesn't scare you into exercising, nothing will. Falls are the second largest expense to the healthcare system, second only to end-of-life care. And according to the National Cancer Institute, advanced aging is the #1 risk factor for cancer. 60% of people who have cancer are 60 years or older. So of course you're all thinking, right? Because this is what you really want to know. How do you actually slow the effects of aging and avoid all of the stuff that I just mentioned? So I'm going to share with you now the 4 fountains of youth, because there isn't just one, there's really 4. The first one is sleep. The ideal sleeping duration that research shows to combat aging is between 6 and 8 hours per night. Raise your hand if you get that. Awesome. You are already doing something to make yourself fight aging and live longer. Research shows that sleeping less than 5 hours more than doubles your risk of death from cardiovascular disease. And sleeping more than 9 hours doubles your risk of mortality, but from other factors, mostly things like depression. The second one is stress. The second fountain of youth is stress, specifically, obviously, controlling stress. So chronic stress is really the killer, not really acute stress, like if we're in the wild and we get chased by a tiger and then we get out of the way of the tiger and we're okay. That's acute stress. Chronic stress is that low-level stress that comes from our cell phones and our computers and our family members and our job and all that stuff. And that is because chronic stress elevates a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol floats around in our body and starts to compromise many functions. It's a catabolic hormone. It's a steroid. One of the things it does is it actually causes abdominal obesity. It causes us to lose muscle mass. And it compromises our immune system, which is the biggest problem. It ends up causing cardiac damage and atherosclerosis and is associated with facial aging. It's aging of the face. Aging of the face, as it turns out, is actually a marker of early mortality and morbidity. So when you see somebody, you see them a couple of years later and they look much older than they used to, that's actually due to cellular changes that are markers of how that person is doing health-wise. That's why you can look at somebody and say, oh, you look so youthful. And we refer to this as the Lincoln effect. So if you ever heard about Abraham Lincoln, when he first started his presidency, he looked young, and a couple of years later, he didn't. And you can say that about many, many presidents. If you look at before and after pictures, they shouldn't look that different in 4 years. So what does research show? Research shows that there's 3 areas you can work on for de-stressing that is proven to prolong your lifespan and reduce the effects of aging. The first one is social connection, like this group. The second one is spirituality, and the third one is married life. But the funny thing is, it's true for men, not women. So if a man is married, he lives longer, but if a woman is married, she doesn't necessarily live longer. I thought it would be the other way around.
That's because it kills her.
And these have been positively associated with longevity. The third one is diet. Now, diet is actually a fountain of youth, and I'm going to tell you what specifically about diet makes diet a fountain versus something that puts you 6 feet under. What to Eat was summed up in 7 words by food writer Michael Pollan. And these 7 words are, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. This was published in many, many journals, including the New York Times. Let's start with the first 2 words, eat food. Now by that, Michael meant cheese, not Cheetos, fish, not fish sticks. You guys get the differential there? Okay. The idea is if you can't find it in the wild, it isn't food. This is his definition of food. If you can't find it in the wild, it's not food. So let's take a look at this. Is cereal food?
No.
Not by the definition can you find it in the wild. Is bread food? No. Is pasta food? No. What's the food? The wheat stalk. Can you eat a wheat stalk? No. You can't eat a wheat stalk. You can't digest it. So cereal, bread, and pasta are not food according to Michael Pollan's definition of food. If you were to eat food, you wouldn't be eating cereal, bread, or pasta. So it's a really interesting paradigm shift about the concept of food. So if you're about to eat something, if you ask yourself, would I kill this or gather it? If the answer is no, it's probably not food. The second part is not too much. In 1934, it was discovered that caloric restriction can extend lifespan by 50%. Raise your hand if you think you could just eat less. It's hard to do, right? The problem is this is only true in rats. Now, that being said, there have been other studies that have tried to replicate this in humans, and in fact, even a moderate degree of caloric restriction can improve cellular health. So we call this in America portion control. Portion control actually has the ability to extend your lifespan because it decreases the metabolic demand of your tissues to actually process all of which you are eating. The third piece of this is mostly plants. Plants are high in micronutrients as opposed to macronutrients. A macronutrient is protein, fat, and carbohydrate. A micronutrient are things like vitamins and minerals, and antioxidants. Now, an antioxidant is important to understand on a basic level. When we are exposed to stress, chemical stress, radiation, and inflammation, we produce things called free radicals. Free radicals are ions that have an unpaired electron. Now, barring all the science, the idea here is that these particles float around in our body and then steal electrons from the lipid layer of our cells, breaking down the cell wall, which is to say that a ROS, or reactive oxygen species, or a free radical, can actually break our cells down. An antioxidant takes that and neutralizes it. So what's an antioxidant? Does anybody know? An example of one?
Vitamin E.
Vitamin E.
Vitamin C.
Vitamin C. There's one more big one. Vitamin A. So vitamins are antioxidants. They combat cellular damage. The other thing about plants is that plants don't contain an amino acid called leucine. Leucine is found mostly in meat, which is why they say don't eat red meat if you want to live a long time. Well, it's one of the reasons. Dairy, soy, legumes, and beans. And studies have shown that just reducing your leucine intake has been shown to prolong lifespan. So the easiest way to think about this is like the Mediterranean diet, which I'll outline in a second. So eat food, not too much, mostly plants. So the Mediterranean diet has been shown to extend lifespan, and the basic premise is vegetables, number one, fish, fruits, notice there's no meat there, nuts, and monounsaturated fatty acids like olive oil. Eat that, live longer, is basically the idea. And age slower. All right, the last one, and this is my wheelhouse, is exercise. In a 2006 study at the University of British Columbia, lack of exercise is the number one modifiable risk factor for developing chronic disease. I did say number one, and I did say modifiable. Middle-aged women doing less than 1 hour of exercise per week had a 52% increase in mortality rate. They doubled their risk of cardiovascular disease, and they had a 29% increase in cancer-related mortality. That's exercising less than an hour a week. In fact, the risk of not exercising is equivalent to that of smoking cigarettes, according to the New England Journal of Medicine. Doing nothing is the biggest risk to your health. Now, increased physical activity and fitness reduce your risk for chronic diseases and death by 20 to 35%. And even a small increase in physical activity is associated with significant risk reduction. So how much exercise is enough exercise to get the benefit? The answer is 25 to 30 minutes of a physical activity like garden walking or biking, or about 20 minutes of a higher energy thing like running, is enough to get most of the benefit of all that you need. You don't need to do CrossFit or boot camp or any of the crazy stuff to combat the effects of aging and live longer and get the benefits. In fact, if you overdo it, which is what a lot of Americans go from, is underdo to overdo, if you overdo it, you end up prematurely aging your joints through tissue damage. We talked about that before. That's one way is to cause cellular damage. So how much effort is enough? How much should you try when you exercise? Who thinks you have to try 100%? 90%? 80%? 70%? Do I have 50%? Well, most of you are right. 50% of maximal effort is all that it takes. So visualize yourself working as hard as you possibly can, and then cut it in half. And that's enough. That ain't that hard. That's doable. All right, if you're not in shape, it's not too late. Studies show that individuals who went from unfit to fit over a 5-year period showed a 44% reduction in relative risk of death. Just having an active lifestyle decreases cancer risk by 46%. Can you imagine if I told you that I'd give you a pill that would drop your cancer risk in half? I would take that pill. Does it pay to exercise more than the minimal amount? What do you think?
Yes.
The answer is yes. The highest level of physical activity and fitness showed the lowest risk for premature death. What if you already have heart trouble? Exercising 35 minutes per day has actually been shown to halt the progression of coronary artery disease, and at a little bit of a higher intensity has actually been shown to take plaque out of the arteries. So it's never too late to start. Exercise also combats diabetes. Moderate weight loss, diet and exercise decreases incidence of diabetes by 50% in a 4-year period. According to the New England Journal of Medicine, moderate physical activity of 2 hours per week is more effective than metformin, which is a diabetes medication for treating diabetes. Is more effective than metformin. What if you already have diabetes? Walking 2 hours per day will reduce the risk of premature death by diabetes by almost 50%. Inactivity, on the other hand, increases your risk of premature death by 1.7 times. What about cancer? Over 100 studies show that routine physical activity decreases colon cancer by 40%, decreases breast cancer by 30%, decreases recurrent rates of breast cancer by 26 to 40%. What about osteoporosis? Weight training has been shown to prevent or reverse 1% of bone loss per year, and these effects were true even in individuals older than 75 years. Exercise has also been shown to improve function, and loss of function is a sign of aging. It helps you to stand up straighter, that's what research shows, walk longer distances, go up and down stairs, rise from a chair, roll in bed, walk on uneven surfaces, get off the floor, vacuum, rake leaves, and etc. Just think if you have any problem with any of those things, there's research to back up the idea that exercise can improve them. But not all exercise is created equal. Let me explain. Think about exercise like medication. You need the right type of exercise and the right dose of exercise to get the effect that you're looking for. For example, stretching does not improve bone density. Weight training does not improve cardiovascular health, and aerobic exercise does not improve balance. So it's really a this for that approach. If you have a problem, you take a medication. You can't take any medication. You have to make medication for that problem. Exercise is the same thing. If you're looking to improve an aspect of your health, you need the right exercise for that aspect at the right dose. You have to know what to do, how to do it, and when to do it to achieve optimal results. So what are the key takeaways of this talk? Not all living things age. For the most part, humans do. Cellular aging is a combination of program factors and accumulated damage, and accumulated damage is the one that we are trying to combat with our habits. Damage can be mitigated and even reversed by engaging in healthy habits. The 4 things that you need to look at are sleep, stress, diet, and exercise. Let's sum up again. Sleep between 6 and 8 hours. Don't get less and don't get more. That is the sweet spot of sleep. Eat food, not too much. Mostly plants, are the 3 things you can do diet-wise to look, feel younger, move younger, and live longer. Reduce your stress through healthy relationships and fun, meaningful activities like social connection. Exercise daily for 30 minutes, that's all it takes, and a minimum of effort of 50%. That's all it takes to live longer. And ask me how to get started. Thank you, guys.